getting on the subway in New York City in about 2003. And I was with some of my friends that I travel and play music with. And one of the things that we noticed almost immediately was we noticed how many people there had little white Apple headphones and the little cord that ran down to their pocket. And we noticed that almost everyone on the subway had those headphones. And I can remember seeing on television what the subway was like. But then what I saw when I was in New York City was completely and utterly different. And I made a comment to one of the guys I was traveling with that all of a sudden that felt like the loneliest city that I'd ever been in. Because everywhere I looked, there were little white headphone cords, and everyone was isolated away from everyone else that was around them. It was still crowded, still full of people, but the chatter was gone. The talk was gone. The interactions were gone. And instead, it was replaced by rustling and movement. And we all saw that same thing. And when we saw that same thing, we all kind of decided that we didn't want to do that because those little headphones had built barriers to entry. They had built isolation. They built something else. And truthfully, I think over the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of that happen. And somehow we have to start being conscious of it. I notice it. I'm in the emergency room with my youngest because he broke his elbow a few weeks ago. And in the emergency room, everything was silent and everyone was on their phones. When I go to the barber, people aren't sitting around like all of the things that we saw on TV shows about barbershops growing up and all the chatter that happened. Silence. People playing words with friends. And the irony of the fact is they were surrounded by people that could be their friends. And instead they're playing words with friends with people that weren't even in the room. I can remember it was my friend Kendall's birthday. His birthday is a few days after mine, but we were in Tampa, Florida, and we were celebrating his birthday at this, I can still picture it. We were at this really great Brazilian restaurant in Tampa, Florida, overlooking the bay. And about halfway through the meal, I got up and I went to the bathroom. And whenever I came back, I caught a glimpse of our table. We're at a birthday celebration with 4 of my best friends. And every single one of them were on their phones. And the truth is, if I'd been sitting at the table, I would have been on my phone too. So it wasn't a judgment. It wasn't a condemnation. It was a realization. And whenever I sat down, I just brought that up to the guys. I was like, we're here with our best friends and we are texting with people that are 1,000 miles away. And we're celebrating Kendall's birthday. And yet we weren't really present. So we made a rule that night. When we sit down to dinner together, we get an extra bowl and we put all of our phones in the bowl. And it was a small little habit, little shift that we made that encouraged us to actually be present with each other because we had drifted into the same kind of isolation that we saw on the subway in New York City with all the headphones and the cords. Different activity, same isolation. After that night, the phones were in a bowl. This time belongs to us. We get to choose. And once we saw it, we couldn't stop seeing it. And it made me start wondering, what else could that look like? Where else are the places that we are quietly drifting away from the people that are around us? A few years later, I was on a trip. We were in Venice, Italy, sitting on the canal, eating a really great meal. I can still picture the meal. I can still picture the canal. I can still picture all of it. It was April in Italy. It was a cool evening. It was quiet. It was really great. And as we were sitting there, there was a couple that was at the next table over, and they had a younger kid, probably 18 months old, and he was not happy to be there. And every so often he would just shriek or he would cry, or he was mad, or everything. And at some point, that couple actually leaned over to our table and apologized for how loud their son was being. And I just told him, I was like, it's okay. I got kids. I understand this. Don't worry about it. And they started telling us, this is the first time that we've taken a trip since we had our child, and we're trying to figure out what life is supposed to look like with a new child. And I was like, oh, I understand. My kids are getting older, and I can remember those days. And we just kind of had small talk about it. And that small talk, the table over on the other side heard that small talk, and they kind of scooted over and started chiming in. And when they started chiming in, they had this thick Italian accent. So I asked them, I was like, where are you guys from? We found out the couple over here that was on a trip, they were from Germany. And this couple on the other side, they were from actually Venice. They lived in Venice, which was really fascinating to me. A lot of people don't know this, but there aren't a lot of residents in Venice anymore because it's almost all tourism. But this couple actually lived in Venice. And I asked them, I was like, tell me more about what it's like to live in Venice. And I'm like, what do you want to know? I said, well, what's your favorite restaurant? Well, you're eating in it. We come here once a week. This is part of the rhythm of our life. And I was like, not to ask anything too personal, but like, roughly where do you live in the city? Because I'm just curious. And they're like, oh, we live close by. See that street right over there? If you go down the street about a block and a half, you'll see a little bakery. And above that bakery is our flat. It's like, oh, it's got to be great living above a bakery. Your house smells good all the time. And they said, yeah, it smells good all the time, but bakeries also start at about 3:00 in the morning. So there's goods and bads. We all laughed about it. I started asking more questions. Where do you go for coffee? Where do you go? I assume that you shop at that bakery. I assume that started asking questions about what their life looked like. And as they were talking about the way that their life looked, I just noticed this pattern of, well, their tailor is here right down the block from where they live. And the bakery is downstairs, and their favorite restaurant is on the corner. And I said, I'm really curious. And I'm not trying to make this a religious conversation, but do you guys go to church? Because I was just curious. And I said, yeah, we go to church. I said, where do you guys go to church? Because as Americans, we kind of have this, I didn't say this, but in my mind, I thought we kind of have this choosing mechanism for going to church in America. When I asked them where they went to church, they both looked at me like I was crazy. I was like, is that a weird question to ask? I was afraid that I'd offended them because all of a sudden we're talking about religious stuff. And they said, no, it's not weird. What's weird about the question is we go to the church in the square. Well, but there's churches all over the city. He said, but we don't go to churches we go where our neighbors are. Huh. So you eat in your neighborhood, you shop in your neighborhood, you drink coffee in your neighborhood, you go to church in your neighborhood, you have all these things and all these places where you have actually cultivated connection. When I asked him, I said, in America, a lot of times we pick churches based on people that are like us and things that we agree with, and we make all these decisions. The wife said, we pick where our neighbors are. Huh. Felt like a different way of thinking. They were approaching it from a different angle than I would have thought about it, because as Americans, we drive everywhere and we are very selective in a lot of those things. And they were looking at it through the lens of connection, and we were looking at it through the lens of selection. And it made me wonder what it would look like to do something a little different, to be less isolated. So when we came home, we lived in a neighborhood where there were 39 homes, fairly small neighborhood. And when we came home, I went to the store and I bought 2 plastic 6-foot tables. And the first Tuesday of the month, I would take those 6-foot tables out into the driveway, and I let our neighbors know that we were going to have potluck. Now, for those of you, probably all of you know what a potluck is. A potluck is basically bring some food to eat, and we're all going to put all the food in the middle of the table, and we're just going to eat what's there. That way, there's not a lot of planning. There's not a lot of pressure. There's not a lot of any of that stuff. It can just be kind of organic and natural. So the first time we did the potluck, there were about 10 people. And we decided first Tuesday of the month, we're going to do it again. And a month later, 10 became 19. And 19 became 38. And by the end of that summer, we were in a neighborhood that usually they do 2 gatherings a summer as a neighborhood. And there'd probably be 25 or 30 people that would show up for that. But we did one of those gatherings, and it was basically another version of that potluck. And 78 people showed up. None of it was earth-shattering. None of it was innovative. It was white plastic tables and potluck. But remember the beginning? White headphones, cables, iPods in their pocket, isolation. Remember the dinner table, the birthday dinner in Tampa, Florida? Everybody was on their phone. We wanted it to have a different trajectory. We wanted life to have a different trajectory. So what we learned in each of those moments, we tried to incorporate in small ways. Let me say this really clearly as well. For some of you that are, I'm an extrovert, I look at the 78 people and that feels like victory, but sometimes victory is 4 people around dinner table. It doesn't have to be big. The size is not what's important. It is how we approach it, and it is what we are approaching, and it's what our goal is that is important. This isn't about scale. It might just be about saying hello when you get the mail. It might be about parking in your driveway and taking your headphones out before you walk into your house. Because here's what I want to get us to start thinking about. Can you be the one that extends a hand? Can you be the one who asks a question? Can you be the one that takes the first step and welcomes people in? Because something meaningful started to happen in our neighborhood because we put tables in the driveway. We risked the possibility that nobody would show up. But there's this little interesting thing that happens in the middle of it. The reason we did it, and the thing that I said this to my kids, I said this openly to whoever wanted to listen. We were doing that because for me, I wanted to be the house that at some point somebody knocks on our door at 9:00 at night asking for milk or sugar. I wanted to be the house that was viewed as welcoming. I wanted to be the house that was safe as a landing space. We had this, our little redheaded neighbor girl. She was like 4 years old, and she would come over and knock on the door, and she would ask for juice. And we would always give her juice. And her older brother was friends with my 2 sons, and he would show up nearly every Saturday morning. And whenever we were making pancakes or French toast or whatever it was that we were making that morning, Camden would always walk in the door, and I would text Camden's parents and tell them, Camden's here. We fed him some breakfast. And they were like, we already fed him breakfast too. And I'm like, 2 breakfasts for him this morning. And we all just kind of enjoyed it because he would walk in the door and he was one more blonde-headed boy sitting at the island in our kitchen. Because what we wanted was to be a little more connected. And I want to say this real clearly. There are 2 kinds of connections, in my opinion, 2 thoughts that I want us to live inside of, 2 kinds of community that I want us to consider. There is accidental community and there is intentional community. Now, when I say accidental community, I mean the kind of community that happens regardless. It's the kind of community that you're going to see your neighbors at the grocery store. You're going to see your neighbors at the mailbox. You're going to see your neighbors when you walk the dog. You're going to see your neighbors when you do all those things. That's accidental community. There are intentional things that we can do to cultivate it, but those are things that are going to happen, and we get to choose what to do with them. We get to choose. Now, intentional community is my friend Eric, who lives 3.5 hours away from me. If I'm going to see him, I have to drive 3.5 hours to see him. Sometimes we will drive almost 2 hours to this music venue that's right between the two of us, and we would go see a show together. My friend Chad, who lives in Kerrville, Texas, if I'm going to see him, it's going to be because somebody drives 6 hours. That's intentional community. That is a person that, in order for me to see him, I have to make heroic effort. That's valuable. There are people that will be part of your world because you intentionally cultivate that. There are also people that are in your world because you are just around them enough that if you pay attention to it, it can actually be meaningful. But neither one of those things are ever going to happen with that little headphone in your ears and the white cord that goes to your pocket and the isolation and the moat that you've built around your life. When my dad passed away, my youngest was a year and a half, my oldest was a year and a half old. And for those of you that have listened to very many of these podcasts, you know that my dad was a pretty important figure in my life. When he passed away, it kind of wrecked me for a while, rightly so. I was mourning. There were a lot of things that I didn't do during that season. I didn't want to go to parties. I didn't want to hang out with people. I didn't want to do all the stuff. I didn't want to do all the normal things. I would rather just kind of stay home and lay low. So guess what didn't happen in that season? Intentional community didn't happen in that season. But I still had an 18-month-old. He still needed bananas. He still needed avocados. He still needed food. So one of the days I had to go to the grocery store and buy some bananas and avocados and get some milk. And I can remember I was standing in the milk aisle, and one of my neighbors, his name is Chris, we actually went to church together. His fence backed up to mine. We didn't know each other well. We just were familiar. We were acquaintances. But he knew enough about my life, and I knew enough about his, that when he saw me, he said, "Hey, how are you doing?" Because he knew my dad had passed away. And when he said, "Hey, how are you doing?" I fell apart. Standing in the milk aisle at Homeland grocery store. And I probably spent the next 40 minutes ugly crying. And it happened because of things like the white tables set up in my driveway. It happened because of saying hi in the grocery store, and because of saying hello when we're walking the dog, and doing all the other really small things that were part of accidental community. That moment only existed because of everything that came before it. And I want to say this, on some level, we all want what happened on that aisle. We all want it. Now, maybe you don't want to ugly cry in public, but we want to be seen. We want to be known. We want to be heard. We want somebody to ask how we're doing, and we want them to actually mean it. We all want that. That desire is one of the most human things that there is. But that desire can also make us passive. Because what we really want is we want somebody to ask that of us. But in order to get there, we have to be willing to ask that of them. Do you hear me? We want to be seen. If that's what you want, then don't wait to be rescued. Be willing to rescue. Don't pretend like you're too busy when you get out of your car and you're walking inside. Say hello. When you're walking your dog, you see your neighbor, don't pretend like you're busy with your phone. Wave at them. Make an effort in those small areas, because it's amazing how when you make an effort in those small areas, they turn into really meaningful things. Because the giving and receiving alternate. One doesn't happen without the other. But I will say this, somebody has to start. So you know what I've told my kids? You know what I've told myself, to be honest? What I've told myself is that somebody has to start. Somebody has to initiate. Somebody has to be willing to set up 2 tables in their driveway and be willing to look foolish when nobody shows up. Because 10 can't show up if nobody is invited. We want to be invited. Invite. We want to be seen. See. We want to be asked. Then ask. Because the cycle only works if someone is willing to keep starting it. Let's think on that. Thanks so much for being here. See you next week.